was like exploring, trying to do a podcast with this company called Treefolk Media. We were exploring kind of all the things that I was obsessed by, animals and football and video games and gardening and stuff like that, and nothing we could really kind of get over the finish line. Stuff was in kind of heavy development and stuff. Excuse me. And then we just hit upon this idea of the world of Sherlock and looking at it from this angle of Moriarty. You know, I mean, we all kind of thought that it was fascinating to kind of look at these iconic characters and just kind of shift that point of view. You know, for any of these characters in history, whether it's our human history or fictional history, for these quote-unquote bad people to do what they do, they must think that they're right. They must think that they're justified. Otherwise they couldn't get out of bed in the morning or you know, look in the mirror. So I think Moriarty thinks that he's been unfairly treated, and you know, it's you know, an unjustified state of affairs, and that's how he behaves the way that he behaves. So from that point, we kind of thought, well, that's a great place to kind of write from. And then they went away, and Charlie, our writer, wrote the show, and then they came back to us, and then we kind of put it together, and now it's a podcast.
What are you most excited for the audience to experience with this sort of different version, iteration of Moriarty?
Well, I was listening to it in the car in Los Angeles, and I thought like it was really profound the way that it kind of transports you back to a different time in a different country, you know. Obviously I know what London is like in a modern day format, but you know, the whole kind of cobble streets of London and horse-drawn carriages and stuff like that is not the London that I know, but I felt like I'd been taken back there. But I think like there's the kind of immersive element to it, but also like, you know, the fact that we have these very dynamic, established characters, you know, Sherlock Holmes and Lestrade and, you know, Watson and people like that, which have already been established, that people like and that people are fascinated by. And we get to see those, we see Sherlock, we see Watson, but now we're looking at those people from a slightly different point of view of like, oh, maybe they're not exactly what they seem. It just breathes new life into this mythology, you know.
Wondering if you could talk about your relationship with Billy Boyd. You guys have worked together before. You have friendship. You have podcasts together. What's it like working on a project like this with your friend that you've known for years?
Yeah, I mean, as I'm sure you guys can empathize with, anytime you get a chance to work with your friends, your days are just easier, you know. You have a partner in crime, you have someone who you can go for lunch with, you know, you have someone who you have the shorthand where you don't need to know if they need a little pick-me-up of energy, or, you know, what to make them laugh, or, you know, Billy and I would obviously get lunch together, or maybe have early dinner if he was racing back and the traffic was terrible and stuff. So, I mean, just spending time with Billy is fun. I mean, I see him every Tuesday because we have our own podcast, The Friendship Onion, so just kind of extending on that feels like, you know, you're doing a job that's a little easier, you know. He's a great actor, Billy, in his own right, and I think he brings something very grounded and earthy into that role, and yeah, it's just fun, you know, we're pals.
If I had heard that you recorded your parts together,
Yeah.
which is different from how everybody else did it.
Yeah.
Was that something that you pushed?
Yeah, we both kind of pushed for it, but I certainly was pretty kind of keen to make that happen. And also the convenience of, like, you know, we record our own podcast on a Tuesday, so we just kind of said to Audible, you know, we were like, well, we're together on a Tuesday and we finish at 4, so why don't we just record either before it or after it for a few weeks, and we can get it done. It's helpful as an actor to have someone to play off. It's helpful for me to have someone that I can play off who I love being around, and we trust each other as actors, and you know, you're not going to be in competition with each other. It just makes everything easier. You know, it's a shame that I didn't get a chance to do the stuff with Phil or Lindsay, but we are exploring in season 2 maybe having a little bit more of a studio space so that all of us can be there, and if we're not in a particular scene, you can go sit in a green room and kind of wait, and then they can bring you in a little bit more like doing a play, you know.
We talked to Phil and Lindsay about like finding their voice. and this is something different for you. How did you go about finding the characters work for Moriarty?
Excuse me. Well, I think other iterations of Moriarty, and certainly like the history of Moriarty, from what we know, is that he's obviously like a well-to-do person in society, highly intelligent, friends with the glitterati and the royal family and stuff like that. I wanted to make him a little accessible, so not only was Billy's performance helpful, because Billy's performance is very kind of earthy and grounded, so I thought, well, if Billy's grounded to that degree, I can't be so kind of posh with my accent that they don't seem to have any element of kind of common ground with each other. So of course he's well spoken, of course he's confident at speaking in front of groups of people because he gives lectures and as a mathematician and as someone kind of well up in society, but I probably made him a little less kind of posher and highfalutin than other Moriartys, just a little bit more easier to the ear.
Can you speak to some of the challenges of acting wholly with your voice and not having any of the visual or physical cues you're able to use?
I don't think it's that different. We were just doing a panel about that, and I certainly don't approach it any differently. For me, it's like, how can I make this character feel real and breathable? So I always kind of fill in the gaps. Obviously Stanislavski's very keen on like the imaginary if and things like this, and what would happen when the scene ends, what would that character do? So for me, I'm always kind of thinking, okay, how does he wake up in the morning? How does he have his breakfast? How does he have his coffee? What happens if someone cuts him off on the street? What happens if someone shortchanges him? Or how would he fall in love with someone? So I did that kind of work, and then you just bring all of those answers in your mind to the character with the script. But in terms of like, if I'm running in a scene, there were times where, the people would be like, hey, you can't actually run because it's gonna like mess up the mic. But I would try as hard as I can to be as close to that without ruining it. So if he's upset, I would try and get upset. If he's excited, I would try and be excited. If he's talking to Rose, who he's in love with, it's completely different in the way that he presents himself than if he's in an argument with Moran. So doesn't really feel any different. Maybe it should feel different. Maybe I've done it all wrong.
Is there a challenge to you're playing a iconic character who's been around in Western culture? Maybe the only other villain who's been around in popular culture longer is Satan.
Right.
Is there, as an actor, can you just work off the script directly, or is there the weight of all those other interpretations over your shoulder?
I think you have to, you have to take it as a singular piece of work, because if I started to kind of look at previous Moriartys outside of the books, I obviously looked at the Moriarty in the book, but the Moriartys of recent movies or recent TV shows, I think you find yourself unfortunately being too influenced by that, and maybe you're doing a slight impression of that, or so I avoided the great Moriartys that I have seen in films and TV shows, once I knew I was going to play Moriarty in this version. But certainly obviously read about how Conan Doyle felt about Moriarty, because that's the source material. It has to be your version of it, otherwise it's like the Joker. Like, I don't think, obviously Joaquin is like hugely aware of what Ledger did as the Joker, and Ledger's aware of what Nicholson did as the Joker, but if they start to kind of watch that and study it, then it bleeds, and then you have people going, oh, I see that little trick, I see that little thing that you cheated. So I tried to stay away from it.
Time for one more question.
Was there a personal element?
We got a Manchester United scarf on.
Of course I did.
Good for you, man.
Was there a personal element of your love of that character that you had to add to your voice while you were doing this? Was there something you decided you needed to put in there?
I'm interested in unsolved things and curiosities. I'm always kind of doing deep dives into unsolved crimes. Certainly, I'm interested in unsolved serial killers and mysteries and murders and stuff. But also just strange phenomena. Things that happen. Billy and I have had quantum physicists on our podcast a couple of times now to explain the real strangeness of kind of quantum law and stuff. So I think I am interested in exploring all the things that we don't know, in the same way that Moriarty is. The distinct difference between me and Moriarty is Moriarty's a mathematician, and I'm really bad with numbers, you know, really. I mean, genuinely, I looked it up once. There's this thing called dyscalculia, which is basically like dyslexia with mathematics.
Right.
Yeah, dyscalculia. Like, I can't subtract things. I can't do division. I can't do multiplication. I can add even numbers. I struggle with odd numbers. This is what happens with me, right? Just very briefly. Let's say someone says, add 12 to 17. What happens is, in my brain creates a picture of 12 pieces of chalk, and then it creates a picture of 17 pieces of chalk, and then it brings those two things together and asks me to count the new picture. Instead of, my dad over the years would be like, well, no, just imagine that 12 is 10 with 2 added to it, and 17 is 10 with 7 added to it, and add those two 10s, and then add the 7 and 2. I'm like, I can't do it. So I have this weird broken part of my brain in terms of numbers, and obviously 12 and 17 is relatively easy, but then if you're thinking about, you know, add 387 to 484,
Especially
I'm now
thinking about
having 387 pieces of chalk and 487, so it just doesn't work, you know. So that's the profound difference between me and Moriarty. But in terms of like being curious about almost everything, that's my thing. I'm just like, oh, a new thing. If someone's into something, I'm like, oh, tell me about that thing that you're into. Maybe I'll be into it too. You know?
Right,
So,
right.
yeah, those are the similarities.